Mr. President, I rise today along with my colleague from New Hampshire to discuss an issue that has been talked about on this floor over the last several years many times, but it continues to be a problem. The senator from New Hampshire has been very focused, as have I, on this issue of the release of detainees from Guantanamo and the fact that we know that not only are there dangerous individuals there that should not be released, but we also know that these individuals are returning to the fight. And they're scheming, planning, and intending to do harm to America and Americans. So I want to visit this issue again, and I want to start off just by saying that it's well-founded in our nation's history that the United States has the authority to hold enemy combatants until the end of hostilities in order to prevent their return to the battlefield. For the past several years, each National Defense Authorization Act that has been signed into the law by the President has recognized this principle and made clear that any al-Qaeda-affiliated terrorist, whether foreign or American, who takes up arms against the United States can be held under the law of war. Because Congress authorized the use of military force against these terrorists shortly after they attacked us on September the 11th, 2001, detention within a military framework is often the best means of collecting valuable intelligence to prevent further terrorist attacks while ensuring that they remain on the sidelines for the duration of the conflict. Now, there are fundamental failures of the administration in the war against terrorism. First, when the President announced the closing of the detention facility at Guantanamo in January of 2009, he left our nation without a clear policy for detaining and interrogating suspected terrorists. Without such a policy, including one that identifies a facility for holding terrorists that are captured outside of Afghanistan, the intelligence community's ability to conduct ongoing intelligence operations have been severely limited. Second, and even more alarming, is the ill-advised release of these Gitmo detainees back to the battlefields from which they came. I would suggest to the senator from New Hampshire that we are doing material harm to our national security efforts by purging the Guantanamo facility, particularly without a long-term plan or guaranteed monitoring, and I know she is going to address this issue. In fact, those who remain at Guantanamo Bay today are not low-level fighters who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They are some of the most hardened, determined extremists that we have encountered and remain singularly focused on bringing violence to the United States and our allies. Shockingly, many of the detainees that are being transferred were determined to be too dangerous to transfer by the administration's own Guantanamo Review Task Force, yet many of them are still being transferred. I've been to Guantanamo on several different occasions, the most recent time being about 3 months ago. And I can attest once again that these truly are the most hardened and the most dangerous terrorists that exist today, particularly that are obviously in captivity. And these individuals, as you see them on the screen in their cells, you can see in their eyes that criminal activity is occupying 100% of their thought, and that they truly are determined that they're going to one of these days get out of that facility and return to the battlefield. There was one particular anecdote where the leadership at the facility and I were engaging in a conversation, and it was close to the cell of one of the individuals, and all of a sudden we realized that that individual was telling other cellmates that he was trying to hear what was going on in our conversation. It has gotten that sophisticated on their part when it comes to trying to figure out ways to communicate with the outside of ideas that they have about killing and harming Americans, and planning and scheming for one day, as I said earlier, to leave that place and to re-engage in the fight. Now, instead of working with Congress to develop common sense policies to enable our national security personnel to detain and interrogate terrorists, this administration is releasing them back with little thought to their future actions. In this haphazard fashion, there is no uniform procedure for the continued monitoring of these individuals. Individuals, I might add, who have already demonstrated a propensity for violence. Each country accepts them on their own terms with varying commitments and cooperation, making further monitoring by the intelligence community and our partners nearly impossible. This is neither a safe nor a sustainable way of ensuring the national security of the United States, yet it has become an all too common practice in this administration. We know for a fact that a number of these former detainees are returning to the battlefield with renewed zeal to wage war against our American way of life. According to the Director of National Intelligence, an additional 4 former Guantanamo detainees were confirmed to have rejoined the fight between July of 2013 and January 2014, raising the combined suspected and confirmed recidivism rate to 29%. In addition, although the next report has not been released, we know this number will increase. We constantly face new plots and operatives looking for ways to murder Americans, such as the full May 2012 AQAP plot that put another IED on a United States-bound aircraft. Thankfully, this plot and others didn't materialize, but we are not going to always be that fortunate, especially in the absence of meaningful interrogation of terrorists and their imminent return to the battlefield. We know that Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or AQAP, today represents one of the biggest threats to the United States homeland, as well as personnel serving overseas. They are continually plotting against our interest and seeking new recruits, especially among our own citizens as well as former Guantanamo detainees. Explosive experts such as Ibrahim al-Asiri continue to roam free, posing a tremendous threat to the safety and security of U.S. citizens. It's Mr. al-Asiri that is the bomb-making expert that has attempted to devise bombs that cannot be detected by the equipment in airports so that they can hopefully place a bomb either inside an individual or on an individual who can secure a seat on an airplane without that bomb being detected as they go through the various checkpoints at airports around the world. Additionally, as the senator from New Hampshire again will allude to, that this proposed closure of Guantanamo Bay presents significant risk for the United States as well as Yemeni efforts to counter AQAP inside of Yemen. A substantial portion of the detainees remaining at Guantanamo Bay are, in fact, Yemeni citizens. Transferring these individuals to a country plagued by prison breaks, assassinations, and open warfare at this point could prove catastrophic. These detainees would likely rejoin several other former Gitmo detainees who have returned to the fight in Yemen, further destabilizing the country and worsening an already tenuous security situation. The most recent example of a totally failed and dangerous policy on the part of this administration is the exchange of the Taliban 5 back in May. That decision to release 5 individuals who now wake up every morning thinking of ways to kill and harm Americans was wrong. This administration clearly and callously failed in its obligations of notifying Congress. It appears they did not comply with this requirement because they knew there would be objections to the release of those 5 individuals from both sides of the aisle, and here in the Senate as well as across the Capitol on the House side. This administration clearly decided that, that they wanted to intentionally release these individuals in spite of the fact that we had included language in the previous defense authorization bills requiring specific notification to Congress in advance of them doing so. In addition to simply violating that notification requirement, the administration violated the Anti-Deficiency Act by obligating funds that were not legally available. While the President has a habit of ignoring laws relating to domestic policy, such as health care and immigration, this overreach will likely directly threaten the lives of our citizens and service members in Afghanistan. In the wake of the President's bold defiance of congressional oversight, I wrote the White House requesting the declassification of the 2009 Guantanamo Review Task Force assessments for the Taliban 5. I also requested on the floor of the United States Senate that the administration release these files so that the American people can know what I know and what the presiding officer knows and decide for themselves if that was the right decision. Today, I renew that request, and I call on this administration to fulfill its failed promises of transparency and show to the American people the very real stakes they are gambling with in their attempts to empty Guantanamo. Nevertheless, this dangerous trend continues unabated, even amidst bipartisan calls for greater oversight after the Taliban 5 release. In November alone, 7 detainees were transferred, 3 to the country of Georgia, 2 to Slovakia, 1 to Saudi Arabia, and another to Kuwait. Some of these countries have previously had detainees sent to them. We have mixed reaction as to the re-engagement or the oversight that's provided in those countries. Some of these countries have never had a detainee that they have taken possession of. We have no idea what kind of supervision they're going to exercise over these individuals. So whether it is in Iraq, Afghanistan, or in other parts of the Middle East, Americans have fought and died in the war against al-Qaeda. Our nation may be weary of war, but threatening elements still remain. And those 5 individuals, the Taliban 5 that I just alluded to, are clearly threats to the United States. I urge President Obama, as well as my congressional colleagues and the American people, not to abandon the gains that we have made in this fight against terrorism since 9/11. We must remain steadfast in our resolve to defeat extremists who oppose freedom, democracy, and our American way of life. I look forward in my remaining days here in the United States Senate to working with colleagues such as my friend from New Hampshire and other members of this body as we continue to face this growing threat. With that, Mr. President, I would yield.